January 6, 1942. Manila Bay, Philippine Islands. The water burns. Oil from the sunken USS Canopus spreads across the harbor like a black mirror, reflecting the smoke that rises in thick columns from Cavite Naval Yard. Japanese Zero fighters scream overhead in tight formation, their engines a high-pitched whine that drowns out the chaos below. In the shattered remains of the American naval base, a young Filipino dock worker watches as the last stars and stripes is torn down by advancing Imperial Japanese Army soldiers. The flag falls slowly, almost ceremonially, and in that moment, it seems as though an entire world order collapses with it. For this is not merely the fall of Manila. This is the apparent death of American supremacy in the Pacific. This is the moment when the Empire of Japan, victorious at Pearl Harbor just 4 weeks earlier, triumphant in Hong Kong, advancing unstoppably through Malaya, believes it has broken the back of Western imperialism in Asia. From Tokyo to Berlin, from Rome to occupied Paris, the Axis powers watch with satisfaction. The Americans, they conclude, are finished. Soft. Unprepared. A nation of shopkeepers and jazz musicians thrown into a warrior's world. They could not have been more wrong. But to understand how spectacularly wrong they were, we must first understand what Imperial Japan believed it was facing in early 1942. The Japanese military leadership, intoxicated by 2 years of unbroken victories, had constructed an image of America built on contempt and miscalculation. In their estimation, the United States was a mongrel nation, racially impure, spiritually hollow, weakened by democracy and material excess. Japanese soldiers were taught that Americans had no stomach for sacrifice, no capacity for the brutal endurance that war demanded. General Hideki Tojo himself had proclaimed that America was a nation of millionaires and paupers, incapable of understanding the meaning of Bushido. The evidence in those dark first months of 1942 seemed to support this view. At Pearl Harbor, the Pacific Fleet lay crippled. Guam had fallen in hours. Wake Island, after a heroic defense, had surrendered. The Philippines were collapsing. Singapore, the supposedly impregnable fortress of British power, would fall in February, the greatest military defeat in British history. Everywhere, the forces of democracy were in retreat. Everywhere, the Japanese war machine advanced. What Tokyo failed to understand was that they had not defeated America. They had awakened it. April 18, 1942. Tokyo. Lieutenant Colonel Hajime Toyama stands on the roof of his apartment building in the Kanda district, enjoying his morning tea. The war, for him, has been a distant thunder. Reports of victory after victory, maps showing the expanding co-prosperity sphere, newsreels of captured American and British prisoners shuffling in defeat. The home islands remain untouched, sacred, invulnerable. Japan has never been successfully invaded in its 2,600-year history. The very idea is absurd. Then he hears them. At first, it's just a strange rumble, different from the usual training flights. Then the air raid sirens begin their belated wail, and Toyama looks up to see something impossible. Twin-engine bombers, flying low and fast, bearing the white star of the United States Army Air Forces. For a frozen moment, he simply stares. It cannot be. There are no American carriers within 1,000 miles. There are no American bases close enough for such an attack. The first bomb strikes 2 blocks away. Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle's raiders drop their payloads across Tokyo, Yokohama, Osaka, and Nagoya before disappearing westward toward China. The material damage is minimal. Some factories hit, some fires started, perhaps 50 Japanese casualties. But the psychological damage is catastrophic and irreparable. The myth of Japanese invincibility, The certainty that the home islands were protected by divine wind and superior spirit shatters like porcelain dropped on stone. The Doolittle Raid accomplishes something far more important than tactical destruction. It proves that America will not accept defeat. That democracy, when threatened, does not retreat into negotiation and compromise. It strikes back. That the nation of shopkeepers can reach across the Pacific Ocean and touch the throat of the emperor himself, but it is merely a preview. June 4th, 1942, northwest of Midway Atoll, Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, the man who led the attack on Pearl Harbor, stands on the bridge of the carrier Akagi. Chotran bow to throne, watching his air crews prepare for what should be a routine destruction of the remaining American carrier force. The Japanese armada is magnificent. 4 fleet carriers, the most powerful concentration of naval aviation in history. Veterans of 100 battles. Intelligence suggests the Americans have perhaps 2 carriers in the area, maybe 3. Damaged ships, inexperienced crews. This will not be a battle. It will be an execution. But American codebreakers have read every Japanese message. They know the target. They know the timing. They know the composition of forces. And waiting beneath the morning clouds are 3 American carriers: Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown, their decks loaded with Douglas Dauntless dive bombers, pilots gripping their control sticks with sweat-slicked hands, knowing they are outnumbered but not outmatched. At 10:22 a.m., the dive bombers emerge from the clouds. What follows is 5 minutes that change the course of human history. American bombs slam into the flight decks of Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, catching them with their decks full of fueled and armed aircraft. The resulting explosions are apocalyptic. Aviation fuel ignites. Ordnance detonates. Torpedoes explode in their storage racks. Within minutes, 3 of Japan's 4 carriers are blazing wrecks, their crews abandoning ship, their aircraft plunging into the sea. By the end of the day, all 4 Japanese carriers are gone, along with 3,057 men and the Empire's most experienced naval aviators. Midway is the hinge, the moment when the rising sun reaches its zenith and begins, inexorably, to set. After Midway, Japan never wins another major naval engagement. After Midway, the defensive becomes offensive, and the American industrial machine, that vast, ungovernable engine of production that Tokyo had dismissed as incapable of military greatness, begins to reveal its true power. For Japanese officers studying the casualty reports and loss statistics in the weeks after Midway, a terrible realization begins to dawn. They have not been fighting a weak enemy. They have been fighting a sleeping giant with the industrial capacity of a dozen Japans, the technological innovation of a free society, and the furious determination of a democracy defending itself. And that giant is now fully awake. November 1943, Tarawa Atoll, Gilbert Islands. Japanese Rear Admiral Keiji Shibasaki has fortified Betio Island into what he believes is an impregnable fortress. 500 concrete pillboxes, 8-inch naval guns in reinforced bunkers, nearly 5,000 elite Special Naval Landing Forces troops, the shock infantry of the Imperial Japanese Navy. Shibasaki boasts that 1,000,000 men cannot take Tarawa in 100 years. The United States Marine Corps takes it in 76 hours. The cost is horrifying. More than 1,000 Marines dead, 2,000 wounded, in what becomes the bloodiest battle per square foot in Marine Corps history. But the Japanese defenders are annihilated almost to the last man. More critically, the Americans learn. They adapt. They study every failure, every communication breakdown, every tactical error. Within months, these lessons transform amphibious doctrine. The next island will be taken more efficiently. The island after that, more efficiently still. This is what Tokyo never understood. American democracy's greatest weapon is not its aircraft carriers or its factories, but its capacity for institutional learning. In authoritarian systems, mistakes are hidden, blamed on subordinates, or denied entirely. In a free society, they are analyzed, published, debated, and corrected. Every American defeat becomes a lesson. Every Japanese victory becomes a trap, breeding overconfidence and strategic rigidity. By 1944, Japanese officers no longer speak of victory. They speak of honor, of sacrifice, of delaying the inevitable. They watch as American submarines strangle their merchant fleet, reducing Japan to slow starvation. They watch as American bombers grow larger, fly farther, carry more destruction. They watch as the island garrisons, Kwajalein, Eniwetok, Saipan, Guam, Peleliu, fall one after another, each defeat bringing American airfields closer to the home islands. And always, always, the Americans come with more. More ships, more planes, more ammunition, more food, more fuel, more men. Japanese soldiers, raised in a culture of scarcity and sacrifice, cannot comprehend the sheer abundance of American logistics. Captured stockpiles on bypassed islands reveal American supplies that exceed Japanese imagination. Refrigerated warehouses full of meat, warehouses of fresh fruit, crates of ice cream mix, cartons of cigarettes, pallets of candy bars. One Japanese officer, inspecting an abandoned American field hospital on Saipan, finds that the Americans carry penicillin for every soldier, sulfa drugs by the case, whole blood for transfusions, even morphine in individual pre-filled syringes. The symbolic object of American power becomes, absurdly, the sea ration. The small olive drab tin, stamped with production codes and packed with processed meat, crackers, candy, and cigarettes. Japanese soldiers, subsisting on rice and pickled vegetables when they can get them, fight with growing desperation against an enemy that treats 3 meals a day as a basic logistical requirement. The sea ration represents everything Tokyo had miscalculated: industrial efficiency, resource abundance, and the democratic principle that individual human life has inherent value worth preserving. August 15, 1945. Tokyo. Emperor Hirohito's voice, thin and crackling over radio speakers throughout Japan, speaks the unspeakable. The war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. It is the greatest understatement in human history. 2 atomic bombs have vaporized Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Soviet armies have obliterated Japanese forces in Manchuria. American bombers have reduced 67 cities to ash. The home islands face not just defeat, but extinction. The surrender documents are signed aboard the battleship USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay on September 2, 1945. General Douglas MacArthur, accepting the Japanese surrender, speaks words that will echo through history. It is my earnest hope that from this solemn occasion a better world shall emerge. Standing on the deck are representatives of all the Allied powers, nations that had suffered, endured, and ultimately triumphed over the most formidable military machines ever assembled. The statistics tell the story of what democracy accomplished. In less than 4 years of war, the United States built 300,000 aircraft, 88,000 tanks, 3,000 naval vessels, and 41 billion rounds of ammunition. American shipyards produced a new destroyer every week, a new aircraft carrier every month. American factories, staffed by millions of women entering the industrial workforce, achieved production miracles that still beggar belief. The nation that Japan dismissed as soft and decadent had outproduced the entire Axis, combined by a factor of 3 to 1. But the numbers alone do not explain the victory. What defeated the Empire of Japan, and indeed what defeated Nazi Germany, was not merely American industrial capacity, but the idea that industrial capacity served. Democracy, for all its apparent chaos and inefficiency, proved more adaptable, more resilient, and ultimately more powerful than fascism's iron discipline. Free people, fighting for principles rather than conquest, discovered reserves of courage and creativity that totalitarian systems could not comprehend. Much less match, Japanese military officers, in their post-war writings, return again and again to this theme. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of Pearl Harbor, had warned before the war, "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." Vice Admiral Matome Ugaki, in his final diary entry before his death in a kamikaze attack, wrote, "We fought with spirit." They fought with spirit in mathematics. Mathematics won. Epilogue. There is a photograph taken in September 1945 that captures something essential. An American sailor sits on a pile of rubble in Yokohama, sharing his sea rations with two Japanese children. The girl is perhaps 6, the boy younger. They are skeletal, filthy, clearly starving. The sailor has torn open his tin of processed meat and is dividing it carefully, making sure each child gets an equal portion. Behind them, the ruins of the city stretch to the horizon. This, too, is American power. Not merely the capacity to destroy, but the choice to rebuild. Not merely the strength to win, but the generosity to lift up the defeated. Within a decade, Japan will transform from vanquished enemy to democratic ally, its economy reconstructed with American aid, its government reformed along democratic principles, its people among the most prosperous in Asia. The day America defeated the world's greatest empire was not a single day. It was 1,000 days of incremental victories, built on democratic resilience and industrial might. It was Doolittle's bombers over Tokyo and dive bombers at Midway. It was Marines dying in the surf at Tarawa and soldiers pushing through jungles in New Guinea. It was factory workers in Detroit and shipbuilders in Oakland. It was codebreakers in Pearl Harbor and scientists in Los Alamos. But most of all, it was the vindication of a principle, that free people, given a just cause, are unconquerable. That democracy, for all its messy arguments and inefficient compromises, contains within it a power that tyranny can never match. The power of human dignity, multiplied by millions. The sea ration tin, now rusting in museum displays, remains a monument to that truth. Inside its simple metal cylinder was not merely food, but the promise of a civilization that valued the individual soldier enough to ensure he was well fed. And in that small gesture of logistical care lay the seed of victory over empires that treated their own soldiers as expendable tools. Japan learned this lesson at tremendous cost. The world learned it by watching, and the giant, once awakened, would not sleep again.